we're going to record this as usual, and it is also live streamed on Masterpiece Action's YouTube. So welcome to all. My name is Ken Jones, and I'm with the War Industry Resistors Network. And tonight's webinar is about nuclear weapons, today, peril or promise. And we'll get started shortly. I'll give a little intro of our two speakers. But before I do, Paul Shannon's going to make some announcements and give a little explanation of what our War Industry Resistors is all about. So over to you, Paul.
Okay, thank you, Ken, and welcome everyone. It's good to see another good group out there for another We're in webinar. So as Ken said, we are the War Industry Resistors Network. We're a network of groups across the country that are focused on challenging various military contractors that are based in their area. So usually one in each area, but sometimes these groups focus on more than one of these companies. These companies, as everyone knows, and as we're all getting to know, they have just tremendous power, not only over weapons production and weapons sales and all that, but also over the creation of our foreign policy. And so we feel like we've got a really good target to address our nonviolent action against. And if we're successful, it will make a big difference in this country. And the wars it gets into are the wars we can avoid. So we'd invite everyone to join, to hook up with us. We do have meetings from time to time, and we'd really like to stay in touch with you, find out what you're doing. And if you are focused on a particular war company, please join us. I'll just mention that we will soon have a new website with our partner, World Beyond War, and we'll be on their platform. And we'll also be changing our email system over to World Beyond War. So that we don't have the link to that yet, but when we do, we'll be sending it out to you. We hope you will check out our website. And let me just see if I can put something in the chat here about upcoming webinars. Where is it? Here it is. These are some links to the April 5th webinar with Michael Kane and Indigo, who we've had on before. Michael will talk about the military, the Pentagon moving on to our campuses. The title of the webinar is Invading the Campus, the Military-Industrial Complex Quest for Academic Know-How. And so that should be very interesting. And then Indigo will speak about military contractors that are developing very, very deep ties with our universities across the country. And then on May 3rd, we don't have a link to that one yet. We have a webinar on Cop City, this struggle going on in Georgia over the building of this Center for Police to be trained in military tactics. That is going to be on May 3rd. So that should be a very interesting one, given that that's a live battle going on right now. We'll have a few other announcement of important events coming up, but I just wanted to start off by calling attention to these two. April 5th, Invading the Campus, and May 3rd, this Cop City webinar. Okay, Ken.
Okay, thanks so much, Paul. And I guess I'll go ahead and introduce Jay Coughlin and Ralph Hutchison. I'm going to just post in the chat a little more extensive bio that they sent me. And there it is. And I'm going to just say maybe a sentence worth for each of them, just to give you an idea of who we have here if you don't know them already. So Jay Coughlin is Executive Director of Nuclear Watch New Mexico. It's a nonprofit organization which is a watchdog to Los Alamos National Laboratory and the Department of Energy's nationwide nuclear weapons complex. And Ralph Hutchison is on the coordinating committee for Nuclear Ban Treaty Collaborative and he's recently retired as coordinator of the Oak Ridge Environmental Peace Alliance, OREPA, just recently in 2023. So Jay is going to begin, and then Ralph will come afterwards. So Jay, over to you.
Okay, thank you all. It's nice to see this good turnout. Just a technical moment here, so get my presentation up and we'll rock and roll. Okay, here's my contact info. I'm assuming that everybody sees this okay and my audio is okay. So given that, we'll go. I'm like the bad news guy on this half. I'll start with this little forward, and I'm not going to read the quotes. They kind of speak for themselves and kind of give you the general tenor of things. But I do point with some pride to that little photograph, which quotes the Pope. I'm working with the Catholic Archbishop of Santa Fe quite a bit. I'll mention that a little bit later. But you can see the Pope Francis's quote here. And the physical location on this is immediately after you cross the bridge on the Rio Grande on the way up to the Los Alamos lab. And this is actually on San Ildefonso Pueblo land. So there's a lot mixed into this bulletin, into this billboard right there. Now, I'm kind of playing the bad news guy, presenting the facts as I understand them. They're admittedly not good. Things are deteriorating. My great buddy and not so retired Ralph will touch upon the good news and what we can do. But all of you, I assume, already know this. The war in Ukraine has dramatically escalated the nuclear threats. And this is deadly serious as far as I'm concerned. We have major nuclear weapons powers expanding their stockpiles. Of particular concern right now is the Chinese buildup. The North Korean policy is quite alarming, involving automatic nuclear retaliation in the event that Kim Jong-un is assassinated or taken out. And all of this, of course, is going to drive up the United States' already bloated budget. And as things stand, we, the U.S., still have some 3,750 active weapons. Our dismantlements are coming to just a crawl at 75 warheads per year. I've calculated that the budget for dismantlements is 0.01% of the total nuclear weapons budget. So this is just really a shame. I emphasize that new production plants are being built now, and they're expected to be operational until at least 2080. And along with all that, we're having new heavy bombers, submarines, and ballistic and cruise missiles. I want to argue that this second nuclear arms race is more dangerous than the first. And I got to tell you, I'm a military brat, and I was highly aware of the first arms race. And again, I'm going to argue that this one's even more dangerous with multiple actors, increased chance of regional nuclear wars, Al-Qaeda or ISIS. We have the development of hypersonic weapons, cyber weapons, and artificial intelligence. So, to my mind, it's pretty grim. I was asked to, in part, address Biden's nuclear posture review. And of course, I start off quoting the WHO. It's meet the new boss, just like the old boss. And Biden's review, it's marginally better than Trump's 2018 nuclear posture review. And I don't want to denigrate the importance of these issues. And it's good that there's no sea-launched cruise missile warhead, which Bush Sr. got rid of after the end of World War II, after the end of the Cold War, but that Trump wanted to bring back. It's also good that Biden wants to retire the 1.2 megaton strategic bomb, the B-83. But, again, these are kind of on the margins. And you have to weigh these relative to the fact that the nuclear weapons budget is higher within the Department of Energy. It is, in fact, doubled from the Cold War average, just to give you some kind of idea and to place it in context. And the Biden review very much, is full steam ahead on new designs and plutonium pit production. I follow with some actual quotes from Biden's nuclear posture review. See how it calls for new designs. That's in the first quote. Again, new production plants operational until 2080. And what's really striking to me, the publicly stated rationale is to maintain the stockpile when exactly the opposite is occurring. There are very intentional, deliberate efforts to introduce uncertainties into the existing stockpile, which has been extensively tested, and to, over time, essentially replace the stockpile with new designs. And these new designs cannot be tested because of the existing global testing moratorium, or arguably worse yet, may prompt the US to resume testing. And as background, most of you will be aware that the United States has never ratified the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. So I want to get into the nature of so-called deterrence, and that's certainly the rationale I sought. That's why we have this immense stockpile. But the first is a quote from the Pentagon's nuclear implementation plan or strategy that the Pentagon issued on 2013. And you can see that the notion of a minimal deterrence is explicitly rejected, and instead a counterforce or countervalue strategy is pursued. And counterforce essentially means targeting military targets, which on the surface of it sounds good instead of cities. But what it means is actual nuclear warfighting. And that's why we have thousands of weapons instead of just the few hundred needed for only deterrence. And then finally, I'll note that Putin has, in effect, turned the notion of deterrence on its head. It's essentially his nuclear weapons that have enabled him to invade Ukraine. So we got a $2 trillion modernization program going on. And what this means is entirely new ICBMs, new cruise missiles, new heavy stealth bombers and submarines, and rebuilt warheads with new military capabilities, and then completely new design nuclear weapons with a perpetual cycle of life extension programs. And this is, in fact, nuclear weapons forever. The following is just to back up what I was saying. There's not going to be any pop quiz on this. The point is to illustrate how extensive this is, with major improvements planned for each existing warhead, plus, again, new designs. And to make this, quite contemporary as it is, the B-61-12 mentioned here, the world's first nuclear smart bomb, it's soon going to be deployed in Europe against the Russians. And believe me, the Russian government is already well aware of this. As stated, there's new production plants going to be operating for, the next 4, 5, 6 decades. Specifically, there a new Kansas City plant, In Ralph's backyard is the uranium processing facility with which Ralph was long involved in. And just as both Ralph and I are somewhat budget wonks, and that facility just increased by 2 billion to nearly 8 billion and even 9 billion when the government swore up and down it would never cost more than 6.5 billion. And then there's this massive money being poured into facilities for production of plutonium pits, which are the cores of nuclear weapons. I do like to point to that pit facility that is planned for the Savannah River site, that it's going to cost $20 billion. And by my reckoning, that's going to be the second most expensive building in human history, exceeded only by the Grand Mosque in Mecca, Saudi Arabia. So we're talking major, major money. This slide speaks for itself. And I can look out the window and see Los Alamos lab like 20 miles away. And, you know, here in this region, you're going to hear a bunch of soft propaganda about all the other stuff that the Los Alamos lab does. But I can tell you that 74% of LANL's annual $5 billion budget, 74% of it is for core nuclear weapons research and production programs. Well, all of the remainder either directly or indirectly supports those core research and production programs. So this slide says it all as far as I'm concerned. Right here is a graph for funding for Los Alamos Lab for fiscal year 2023. We haven't yet got to a graph for the just released fiscal year 2024 budget. You can take that 4.88 billion that's on this and add another $500 million that Los Alamos Lab is going to get this year. And this is also true of the other two nuclear weapons labs. Massive increases for the Sandia Lab, which is by Albuquerque, New Mexico, and massive increases for the Livermore Lab in Livermore, California. Now I'm going to get to plutonium pit bomb core production, which is the key to the resumption of American industrial scale nuclear weapons production. And a pit is like the first stage or primary to initiate fusion in the secondaries that the Y12 plant produces in Ralph's backyard near Oak Ridge, Tennessee. But it was a 1989 FBI raid that shut down industrial scale production at the Rocky Flats plant near Denver. And ever since then, the US government has been trying to restore that industrial scale production. The Pentagon, by the way, calls expanded pit production the #1 modernization issue. So the plan is to have 30 or more pits produced at Los Alamos Lab, accompanied by 50 or more pits per year at the Savannah River site in South Carolina that is experiencing massive overruns and schedule slippages. But President Biden is pouring ever more money into that expanded pit production. Now, if there's any takeaway that I hope you all take from my presentation, it is about pit production and about the fact that no future pit production is scheduled to maintain the safety and reliability of the existing nuclear weapons stockpile. Instead, it's all for future new designs. And the irony is that independent experts have concluded that pits last at least a century. Their average age now is like 40 years. And the Livermore Lab even followed up on that and said it's more like 150 years. Accompanying that is the fact that there are at least 15,000 existing pits stored at the Pantex plant. And now we have, in the last couple of weeks, evidence, or call it proof, that future pits will be heavily modified. And this will raise reliability issues, or even perhaps prompt the US back into testing. So just a little, I want to get into what we can do, but first as a motivational piece, I like quoting Robert McNamara, who was Defense Secretary during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he flat out says that we survived only by luck. And that the only way to really reduce the risk is, first of all, to eliminate that hair trigger alert policy, and later to eliminate or nearly eliminate them. And, who better to say that than the guy who was the defense secretary during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And, for further motivation, and, this is grim, but here we have the effects of a 300 kiloton ICBM warhead targeting New York City. And, we're talking about the utter collapse of the medical systems, the economic systems, the ability to live. And then, of course, in a full exchange, we're going to have 5 billion people starve to death because of a nuclear winter. So enough for why we should do this. I'd like to touch on some past successes as encouragement. Is that the independent nuclear weapons agency within the DOE, that is the National Nuclear Security Administration, they've tried 4 times through National Environmental Policy Act processes to expand PIP production, and we beat them each time. But this 5th time is by far the most serious attempt. And basically, what has NNSA learned from the 4 previous times? Well, it's learned basically to not do NEPA. And towards that end, 3 organizations, my own and Savannah Riverside Watch and Tri-Valley Cares in California, in a dramatic environmental impact statement. And you all probably know this, but the courts move at their own pleasure, at their own schedule, which seems glacial to me. But we hope to reach some kind of resolution in this by August or September. More on the to-dos. I'm an activist, and part of my job is to try to make others active, to get off your butts, get off the couches and do something. And I always want to start by stating, don't underestimate the mundane, talking to families and friends, letters to the editor. There's something that surprises me, but I've been told by congressional staff, by my own New Mexican congressional staff, that the first thing they do every day is scan the newspapers for letters to the editor and report on that to their bosses. So all of this should be done. We need strong support for the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which Ralph is going to address. There should be strong support for House Resolution 77, which the purpose of it is to support the ban treaty. And then I just want to recommend some reading that has definitely counseled me and has led me in my so-called career. The 3 books I mentioned, and the Veterans for Peace Nuclear Posture Review, which posits an alternative to what Biden and everybody else before him has done. I do want to, in particular, recommend the Doomsday Machine, since Daniel Ellsberg has a limited time left on this earth. And that's a very important book. Just to wrap up with more to-dos, Ralph and I have been very much involved in the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability. And I'm pointing to the first DC days to be held in person in DC since the COVID epidemic. we're on our 32nd or 33rd consecutive DC days. The last couple have been virtual, but it's April 23rd to 26th. You could ask either Ralph or myself more about that. Do take part in the processes, the public processes under the National Environmental Policy Act. There will be a new site-wide environmental impact study for the Los Alamos lab this spring. And then if our lawsuit is successful, a programmatic environmental impact study on pit production. One thing I've taken up, and I've been doing this work for more than 30 years, and I see us being politically beat. The irony is that this started under Obama. We used to beat everything that George W. Bush brought up. Every single major initiative we beat. But politically, we're being defeated ever since modernization came up under Obama, who cut a deal with Senate Republicans to get the New START treaty ratified. He cut a $88 billion deal for modernization, so-called modernization, which has since metastasized to 2 trillion, which I've already talked about. But the reason that I'm stating that, that's a prologue, which I've decided to call upon a higher power, that being God, in which I have no credibility, no personal credibility, but I am arguing for working more with faith-based groups and working more even on the immorality of nuclear weapons, which I've avoided for decades. But I feel like we need this added dimension of getting the faith-based groups to begin to explicitly call for nuclear disarmament. And then finally, and I'm closing with this, work with Congress. And, I hear very cynical people, and I can, believe me, I can share that cynicism and even understand it. But I hear people say it doesn't matter which party controls Congress. But I will tell you from personal experience that it really does. And I know we're choosing between only the bad and the worst. But if you go to Congress repeatedly, like Ralph and I have done year after year, and I assume some of you have, believe me, it makes a difference whether or not the committees are controlled by the Democrats or the Republicans. It makes a huge, huge difference. And then, just in looking up, first of all, I was confused about who this presentation was for. And I said it's for Massachusetts Peace Action. And now I realize what a role that the war industry resistors play. But I looked up, the Massachusetts congressional delegation is remarkably good. And that, of course, is relatively speaking. I will tell you that the New Mexico congressional delegation is pretty much excellent on everything except for nuclear weapons issues. That's the irony. But, Ed Markey, he has been steadfast on these issues. But we have to be careful that it's not only him alone. And there are times that, his co-sponsorship is actually a drag. And that says nothing about him. It says about the politics. Elizabeth Warren on the Strategic Forces Subcommittee of Senate Armed Services, very important. James McGovern, who sponsored the House Resolution 77. Seth Moulton, again on House Strategic Forces Subcommittee of Armed Services, very important. And then Richard Neal, who I understand is like the dean of the Massachusetts congressional delegation. And not that this will happen now that the House is under Republican control, but if Richard Neal would, for example, investigate Department of Energy waste, fraud, and abuse, there's no end of it. So just to sum up, work with faith-based groups, work with Congress, all of that should be done. And with that, I can stop. Turning it over to Ralph for the good news. Do note that this presentation is at the can be accessed with the following link. And happy birthday to Ralph's daughter. I get to say that. Your father ratted on you, but happy birthday to you. And with that, I'm going to unblock my screen. And that should do it. And thank you all. And I look forward to Q&A.
All right.
Thank you so much, Jay. Go over to you, Ralph.
Thanks, Ken. Before I start, I want to make one disclaimer. Several times, Jay mentioning the facilities in Oak Ridge said these are in Ralph's backyard. And for whoever's listening from the Department of Homeland Security, he means that figuratively, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. I do not have nuclear weapons in my backyard. I don't have any weapons at all. That shed just has tools and stuff in it. So I want to be sure we're all clear on that. I want to start by saying that first off, that the presentations tonight are a visual representation of one of the problems that is addressed powerfully by the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And that is, until about 15 years ago, the fact that men dominated all the conversations about nuclear weapons was rarely challenged. The process leading up to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons changed that, and the change was codified in the ban treaty itself. So what you see here tonight, two overeducated white boys talking, can no longer be the norm. All of our conversations about the treaty should be elevating the voices of people who have been left out of this discussion for far too long, affected communities, victims of the use and testing of weapons, women, young people. These voices must not only be heard, they have to be listened to. And that only happens when representatives are put in positions of power. So with that, I want to try this screen share and see if I can make that work. Thank you, everybody. Ken, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Massachusetts Peace Action, the War Industry Resistors Network, for the chance to talk with you tonight. Thanks for all the work you've been doing hosting. And as I watched, scan through the gallery view of all the people who are with us tonight, man, I know the work that so many of you are doing. Thank you for that, for doing it persistently year after year. Sometimes I think if we contemplate the great forces that move history, it might seem like we're pretty small and our efforts are pretty meager, but this is how the world gets changed. I want to talk about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and I like to say that in this time of greatest peril, we have received the most powerful tool the nuclear abolition movement has ever had. The treaty entered into force on January 22nd of 2021. That was 90 days after the 50th state ratified it. That was Honduras. Now it has 92 signatory states, and 68 of those have either ratified it or acceded to the treaty. So there are 68 states party to the treaty right now. You can set that alongside the fact that there are 9 countries that have nuclear weapons and 32 countries that are considered nuclear weapons endorsing states. I'd like to try to stop sharing this, but I can't get my cursor to show up. Let me see if I can do this.
You're all set, Ralph.
Right. Thank you, Brian. What good is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons? The TPNW, one thing it's doing is changing the conversation about nuclear weapons. Even before it was adopted in July of 2019 at the United Nations, the treaty, the negotiation meetings of the treaty, the convocations that led up to them over a decade were declaring that all the legitimate conversations about nuclear weapons now must include consideration of the humanitarian impacts of these weapons. In fact, the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons should be prioritized over the other considerations, including the ones that have long dominated the discussion: policies, military postures, projected uses, conditions under which weapons are being used or being threatened to be used. The enormous efforts that the nuclear weapons nations have put in to maintain the political arrangement of haves and have-nots. The TPNW is also changing this conversation by bringing more people into the room. As I mentioned earlier, people from communities affected by the use and development and testing of nuclear weapons. And finally, though you might not know it from what you see or what you don't see in the US media, this treaty is gradually building a very powerful stigma against the possession and threat of nuclear weapons. This is a political lever that can be used around the world. I think weapon states like the United States will resist it for the longest, as long as we can. But non-weapon states under the umbrella are going to feel the power of the stigmatization of nuclear weapons. And then weapons hosting states like Germany, and finally, the 9 nuclear weapons that states themselves are going to feel increasing pressure from the rest of the world to get rid of these weapons. This kind of thing happens every time another financial institution or pension fund declares that it's going to divest its holdings in corporations or other institutions that support weapons production. And it happens every time a parliamentarian, a senator or a representative, a mayor or a council person signs the pledge. It happens when students and faculty and staff and alumni sign the school's pledge. It happens when city councils and local governments sign the city's appeal or Back from the Brink or other pledges. The TPNW that entered into force in 2021 was powerful in itself. But it was also just a skeleton. It was like a rough map of the path to abolition. The task of strengthening the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is ongoing. A big step was the first meeting of states parties that happened in Vienna of this year. See if I can go back to sharing the screen and see if I can make that. So in Vienna, they set out the requirements for, the Vienna Declaration reaffirmed their determination to realize the complete elimination of nuclear weapons and to chart our path forward. This was a really important statement. A big step was taken at the first meeting of state parties in Vienna. Unlike the 30-day nuclear non-proliferation treaty review conference that happened earlier in the summer, which ended up accomplishing nothing of substance. The 3-day first meeting of states parties for this treaty produced 2 very powerful documents, the Vienna Declaration and a 50-point action plan. So in addition to this, what I think is a very powerful and timely statement that we should all become familiar with, they also adopted a 50-point action plan with concrete steps that are aimed at universalizing the treaty. One of those is a commitment to get more countries to join the treaty. But they also did some really important things to put more flesh on the skeleton of the treaty. One of those things was to listen to the voices of the affected communities, the people at the test sites around the world, the hibakusha, survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this underscored the treaty's commitment, and really the world community's commitment to the discussion of nuclear weapons must include the humanitarian and the environmental impacts of these weapons. I think this requires all of us to think about the ways that our language has been constrained by the authorizers, the people who have dominated the conversation about nuclear weapons for decades. The TPNW, for example, challenges us to reconsider the definition of security that's been handed down to us. We don't have to pretend anymore that security means having more or bigger or slicker weapons that could destroy all of us in an afternoon. Or that security means diverting trillions of dollars from our common treasury to nuclear weapons instead of spending them on the things that would reduce food insecurity or inequitable access to health care, or any of the many other social realities that contribute to both the perception of insecurity and also the experience of insecurity. If I can get back to this. So in Vienna, they set out the requirements for nuclear weapons states and for states that currently host nuclear weapons that'll kick in whenever these states sign the treaty. A state that hosts nuclear weapons, NATO countries, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, Turkey, those states will have 90 days from the time they sign the treaty to get the weapons out of their country, off their property and out of their country. A nuclear armed state, the United States and our 8 collaborators around the world in terror, will have 10 years from the time that it signs a treaty to complete the destruction of its nuclear weapons arsenal and its production facilities. And if necessary, they can ask for a 5-year extension. But one of the things that I found really significant about the states parties when they passed this measure was they didn't say 10 years to dismantle your stockpile or 10 years to disassemble your nuclear weapons. They said destroy. They have to completely eliminate them. And of course, the first meeting also reflected the treaty's commitment to inclusiveness, its determination to realize the promise of its preamble, where it said, we emphasize, this was a quote from the preamble, we emphasize the innovative gender provisions of the treaty, and we stress the importance of the equal, full, and effective participation of both women and men in nuclear disarmament diplomacy. So efforts will be made to elevate the voices of the unheard and to give them equal status to the men who have so long dominated this conversation. And finally, I'll say that the first meeting took the decision to continue its work in intersessional meetings. So they're not waiting until the next meeting of states parties. They're setting up committees to deal with technical issues, questions about protocols. And these committees are being designed to have the broadest possible participation, including civil society, including academics, people who normally these discussions have been left up to governments, but that's not the kind of inclusive vision that the treaty has. All of this sets the stage for the second meeting of states parties, which is scheduled for November 27th to December 1st of this year at the United Nations in New York City. If you have not engaged the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons to this point, this is your chance to be there in person. ICANN, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and others will be setting up some side events. There will be a youth gathering. I was able to go to some of the negotiating sessions at the United Nations back in 2017, and I can tell you there's an unparalleled opportunity for connecting with our global partners and strengthening our collaborations. I think one last screen share, if I can make this work. So what's happening in the United States? Now I'm going to pick up where Jay left off on positive things that we might do. There is an organization that I've been working with for 2 years called the Nuclear Ban Treaty Collaboration. And when I say an organization, I'm using that very loosely. I really think that it's a space. It's a space for people to come together and work together and share ideas and resources and encouragement and energy. The single focus of the Nuclear Ban Treaty Collaborative is to get the United States to sign, ratify, and implement the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Every group that I know of that's involved in the Ban Treaty Collaborative does other things, including the group that I recently retired from, all kinds of other things. But when we come to the Ban Treaty Collaborative, we just work on the Ban Treaty. We sort of took a page out of ICANN's book. When my organization 5 or 6 years ago contemplated signing up with ICANN, they said, well, what does ICANN do? And I was able to say they only do one thing. They try to get nuclear weapons eliminated. That's it. Okay, we're in. So we only do one thing, and that's the Ban Treaty. We do provide a lot of resources. We started with the entry into force in January of 2021. In fact, we started a few months before that, developing resources and had a couple of Zoom meetings and made them available. When January 21st happened, we were delightfully surprised to begin to get reports back that there were more than 100 different actions around the country on the entry into force of the ban treaty. And so after that, we thought that was a great moment. What are the chances that we could turn that into a movement? We had another Zoom with many of the people who'd participated, and they were so enthusiastic that here we are 2 years later with the Nuclear Ban Treaty Collaborative. The collaborative does its work in working groups, and right now we have 3 active working groups. One is called Schools of Mass Destruction. You may even hear some about that in your upcoming Zoom webinar that was advertised earlier by Paul, that has to do with campus organizing against nuclear weapons. One is called Days of Action, and the Days of Action working group has been the one that provides resources about the ban treaty. And I'll say just more about that in just a second. And we have a localities and legislators working group. We have room for more. We have room for a faith communities working group. We have room for a divestment working group. We have room for a policy advocacy working group. We have room for an affected communities working group. And in our short life, we have had conversations and even some starts on each of these. But what they need to persist is leadership, energy and leadership in order for a working group to thrive. And since none of us are paid, we don't have any paid staff, and we're all piling this on top of the other work that we do. Our goal right now is just to continue to do the things that we can do and encourage other people to join us and do the things that they want to do. One of the primary things that we've been able to do is provide resources, and I'm showing you on this screen just a couple of them. We have designed banners and put up the templates for people to print. You see the 2 yellow banners there that are from our resource page. You see Felice Cohen-Joppa holding a poster of the ban treaty that is on our resource page. You see on the left-hand side of your screen the sign that was created partly with the help of the Snake River Alliance and all of these are templates that are there, but there are also fact sheets, stickers, posters, sample letters to the editor, media resources, educational resources, action resources, faith statements. You can find out about the Ban Treaty Collaborative. We have a Facebook group. We've named it very cleverly, Nuclear Ban Treaty Collaborative. So you can look that up and join it. We also have a website, nuclearbantreaty.org. That's what the Ban Treaty Collaborative has been doing. But of course, there's other work going on too. It's all important. I don't look at any of this as an either or. You either do this or you do that. I hope it's a both and for people. Back from the Brink with Physicians for Social Responsibility as the lead organization there is doing a lot of good work. Nuclear Ban US, the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability is doing work. People in Congress, Jay mentioned McGovern and Blumenauer's legislation, and I don't know if Eleanor Holmes Norton has reintroduced her bill, but I'm sure she will soon. All those advocating the ban treaty. Veterans for Peace has been working very hard on these issues as well. Some faith communities, Jay mentioned the wonderful pastoral letter from the Archbishop of Santa Fe. It's been adopted by Pax Christi, USA. There are a lot of Catholic worker groups that are involved with the Ban Treaty Collaborative. The Presbyterian Church USA, that's the larger mainline denomination, passed a resolution in support of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So we have opportunities to organize. The easiest organizing to me is to go to places that are already organized, where people are already gathering and people are already talking with each other. So to start there, we have some of those things happening. Of course, around the world, ICANN has more than 650 affiliates, all of them working on the ban treaty. And some of the ICANN efforts overlap with the stuff that we've been doing with the Ban Treaty Collaborative here in this country, like the Schools of Mass Destruction, their cities appeal, their parliamentary appeal, the direct advocacy work they're doing in other countries. And of course, don't bank on the bomb. And this is one of the things that I think overlaps pretty neatly with what the War Industries Resistance Network is doing. I'm sure you know about Don't Bank on the Bomb. These reports, I put up here the covers from 2021 and 2022's reports. They are awesome. I mean, they're one-of-a-kind resource to the financing of the bomb, to anybody who wants to understand who's behind it, corporations and financial institutions. I don't think you'll find a better resource than the Don't Bank on the Bomb resources. And there are ways to use them. In Oak Ridge, we do a Sunday vigil out at the bomb plant for an hour every Sunday afternoon for the last 23 plus years. One Sunday after a Don't Bank on the Bomb report was issued, I asked everybody to take the credit cards out of their wallet and purses, just pull one out. And of course, everybody has a different credit card. On the front of it, it has the name of their bank or Capital One or something like that. Mine says working assets on the front of it. I'm a good guy. I work with working assets. I said, turn your credit card over and let's see who really is issuing and who's behind your credit card and who's making money off your credit card. I flip over my working assets credit card and I see Bank of America, who is on the list of the top 10 financial institutions funding nuclear weapons production. Every single one of us, I think there were 11 or 12 in the circle that afternoon, had a direct connection we carried in our pocket or our purse with the production of nuclear weapons. It was our credit card. It is very difficult, if not impossible, to find a credit card in this country that's not issued by one of those big institutions. And I think it would be really useful to circulate the information if people know of them. Even local credit unions owned in the community go to a major provider to issue the credit cards there. But anyway, my point is people have a direct connection to the money that's feeding the war machine, even the money that's feeding the nuclear weapons machine. And there are already localized efforts happening in the United States to talk about divestment from nuclear weapons. Anthony Donovan, I don't know if he's on here or not, but he would tell you about the success in New York City to get Amalgamated Bank to divest from nuclear weapons. There are many of the city's campaigns that people have gone to city councils, and part of what they've asked them to do is to pass resolutions saying we will not invest our city money in institutions, organizations, corporations that are working on nuclear weapons. Like Tacoma Park, Maryland, has been a nuclear-free zone for a couple of decades, I think now. In Pittsburgh, the wonderful group there is working on PNC Bank, and has been tirelessly working on PNC Bank, demonstrating at the Pirates ball games at PNC Park. But the challenge, I think, is these great efforts, they stop short of being a movement because we haven't connected everybody up. And there's a need to coordinate things and to combine energy. And seeing all of you here tonight interested in getting the money out of the military industrial complex, I mean, it's very heartening to me. Thank you for doing that. I'd also just say, and many of you probably know this too, it's happening a lot more in Europe. They have had some of the largest financial institutions in Europe have announced that they are divesting from nuclear weapons stuff through Don't Bank on the Bomb. So we can learn from our European colleagues too. We don't have to start from scratch. Finally, I just want to say the power of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, it doesn't have any legal power in the United States because we haven't signed it. But the moral power of this treaty doesn't know anything about boundaries. It doesn't know anything about ink on paper. The moral power exists. It's an educational tool. It's an organizing tool. It can support us as we do the work that we're doing here. I think this moment presents many opportunities for moving away from the era of the great threat and to move into the age of the ban treaty. I share the view of the Hibakusha and ICANN, who say that the only guarantee that nuclear weapons will not be used is to eliminate them completely. Anything short of that leaves us at risk. The unique existential risk of nuclear weapons, the beginning of nuclear winter, and the end of life, even for those who survived the initial exchange of warheads and bombs. Now, my last word, I have said this treaty is a powerful tool. I believe it. But like way too many powerful tools that I have sitting in my basement, it will sit quietly and it will be ignored unless we take it up and put it to use. So I urge you, echoing Jay, in every conversation that you have about nuclear weapons, speak of the ban treaty, share the hope that it offers, insist that we face the demands of the world who say the nuclear weapons nations have to give up the nuclear weapons. devote ourselves to the only path we have away from the nuclear abyss, and that's the ban treaty. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Jay. And yeah, informative and powerful. I appreciate you both so much. So we are at 9 o'clock, and you know, our last few webinars have really gone past the hour anyway. They've gone into an hour and 15 minutes, hour and 20 minutes. So I hope some of you can stay with us while we have a Q&A session. Let me explain how we do it if you haven't been with us before. What you can see, Peter Metz up there has his hand raised already. And that's how we do it. If you go to the reaction button and raise your hand electronically like that, what you'll do is line up in a queue, and we'll take 15 minutes, 20 minutes worth of Q&A. And then probably we won't get to everyone, and I'm sorry that you know, time permits. Before we do though, Paul, you wanted to mention a couple things. You want to have a couple of announcements, and then we'll go to Q&A.
Well, at least I want to just make a quick pitch, Ken, for you to, I want you to show that wonderful yellow shirt you have on. Please stand up. Okay, so everybody, this is very exciting now. This makes us very official. We now have a T-shirt for the War Industry Resistors Network, and you are able to purchase one of these T-shirts directly from Ken Jones. It's jonesk@maine.edu. That's jonesk@maine.edu. $20 for the shirt, $5 for the shipping. Get yours while the supplies still last. So let us begin the question and answer. I have a few important announcements, but we'll wait till the end.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Okay, I see two hands, and let me please remind you so we can get as many as we can in 15, 20 minutes. Keep your comments a little brief, and please do have a question so that our speakers can come right back in. So Peter Metz, you're the first. Go right ahead.
Hi, I'm Peter Metz. I'm in Massachusetts and a proud member of Massachusetts Peace Action, and doubly proud tonight because of Peace Action's co-sponsoring this. Ralph and Jay, you guys are legends. It's wonderful to meet you finally. Ralph, I have a question for you that bedevils me. Asking the United States to sign and ratify the ban treaty, you pointed out they have 10 years to destroy their weapons. But it doesn't require any other nation to do that at the same time. So it means that any other nation, any nation that steps up, any nuclear nation that steps up to do that is in effect taking a chance that they're going to be unilaterally disarming. I don't see any way to sell that in the United States. Just plain don't. So frankly, I've been advocating for work to get all 9 nations together. It's a long shot. But I want to take Joe Biden up on the words he uttered as vice president when he said, if we want a world without nuclear weapons, the United States must, and he said must, take the initiative to lead the way. And then he went on to say, because we're the only nation to have used nuclear weapons, we have a great moral responsibility. Now, he hasn't delivered on that at all, of course. Anyway, that's how I see it. I think it's more likely to happen if we have multiple nations going together, but the ban treaty doesn't assure that. So I'd like your response.
Peter, I completely agree with you. I think you can say we want the United States. I think you can work for the United States to sign, ratify, and implement the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, and understand that you're talking about doing that in a context. The United States is not going to unilaterally disarm, but the United States can provide leadership. Right. I don't think all 9 countries, nuclear nations, are ever going to sit down at the table while we have such a huge strategic advantage over them. I think the United States and Russia could get down to 750, 600 nuclear weapons and ask China and France and the United Kingdom to come. And I think people can join the conversation as it happens, and they reach the point where maybe everybody signs the treaty on the same day. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed in 1968. The day it opened for signatures, the first two countries to sign it were the United States and the Soviet Union. So, there's a precedent on these treaties. When the nuclear weapons states join up, they don't necessarily do it sequentially or go out on a limb or take a risk. They've done their homework and the pre-work to come to the table together.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, I see, well, 3 more hands. So again, comment brief and pose a question. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Ken. It's nice to meet you in DC this last weekend. Just had a quick question for Ralph about, could you talk a little bit about just what the logistics would be for the United States to ratify this treaty? We need a 2/3 vote in the Senate. Is there any sense of how many senators might be friendly to this, or what the process would be for putting it before the Senate?
Well, as you know, we haven't been able to get the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty ratified by the Senate. So I think we're a long ways away from doing that. While I agree with Jay that it's important to work on our representatives in Washington, D.C. and what's happening there, I think it's equally important, and maybe right now, at this point, even more important, to be building the grassroots strength that can command some kind of attention in Washington, D.C. That's going to be the way that we to begin to build the kind of strength that would need to ratify a treaty. So you're right, it would take 2/3 of the members of the Senate to ratify the treaty. It's interesting, in the United States, when a president signs a treaty, we are technically bound not to violate that treaty, pending the ratification of the Senate. So I don't quite know what the status would be if a president signed the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons that obligated him to take particular steps. I think it would really elevate the conversation in Congress.
Hey, Quanta Dawn Light, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I wanted to, I repeat this in different circles as well. I think if we look at the pictures right now, all of us, I'll be 77 myself, and was a peace activist back in the 70s. And I think we have to transfer the enthusiasm, the inspiration that we had to the young people and make them aware how their future, and even now they are being impacted by the military-industrial complex. And right now the budget is close to $1 trillion. As you know, the military budget. So I do think that we have to inspire them, and we don't really have time, quite frankly, to wait until the treaties are done and bans, and the kids are enthusiastic and they have technology. We have to tell them, come together and go and find your representative, find your senator, and find one that will introduce a bill. In this bill, it will say 9% of the military budget that's allocated should be appropriated for peace education in schools, as well as being given to peace organizations, so that the young people can be made aware of what is going on, and also come together and march, millions of them all over the world, just as they do when an issue comes up with racism, etc. So they have that enthusiasm, they have the energy, and we just have to inspire them. I just
Quanta,
wanted
do you
to.
have a question, Quanta?
No, I wanted to make a comment. I'm sorry. You can make a question out of it if you like. How are we going to do this? How about that?
Jay or Ralph, did you want to respond to that at all?
Yeah, I want to make a comment on the ban treaty. And, initially I was not that big of a supporter of the ban treaty, but now I am, just because of the way that things have deteriorated. But I do think the ban treaty should not be looked at in a vacuum. there's two other things that are going on. The first is the fact, as I've already stated, that geopolitical conditions are really deteriorating, and the threat of nuclear war is greatly increasing. The only silver lining to that is it now has public attention, which has been lacking since the early 1990s. And I think that public attention will only increase because, again, things are going to further deteriorate. But I would point to the same freeze movement of the 1980s, where we may actually begin to have some mass mobilization on this issue sometime in the future. And it's known that that essentially turned around Ronald Reagan from being an arch Cold War warrior into a bit of an abolitionist. At least he tried with Mikhail Gorbachev, but that was prevented by the lies of the Livermore Laboratory, which is a whole nother thing. But the second element is, and this is why I've come to support the ban treaty, is because of the repeated failures of the last three review conferences of the non-proliferation treaty, which in a way makes the ban treaty the only game in town. Now, how to get the US to ratify the ban treaty? It's simply impossible as of right now. The benefit I see of the ban treaty, and I have not worked on it like Ralph and other people have worked on, so maybe I'm not entitled to say this, but the way I view it, a large benefit of the ban treaty would be to isolate the nuclear weapons powers. And if in effect we could have the rest of the world expressing opprobrium about what the nuclear weapons powers are doing, and if in time that eventually could translate into them honoring Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty to finally enter into negotiations leading to nuclear disarmament, I see great value in this. So whereas we're going backwards, and especially within the context of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, I can see where with increased public attention and concern that the ban treaty and the non-proliferation treaty can kind of work hand in glove towards a solution here. But there needs to be a lot of work. And in part, that work needs to be directed politically towards the US government, including the administration and Congress. So I'm attempting to unsatisfactorily answer some of the hard questions that have been asked here, which in effect is, what is the practical value of the ban treaty when we know the United States won't ratify it as things are now? But hopefully things might radically change in the future.
Well, I just underscored that very quickly to say, Jay, you're absolutely right. The treaty is impossible for the United States right now, but it is a tool. It's a very powerful tool that we can use to elevate this issue, to educate people, to organize people, to build the kind of grassroots energy and strength that we're going to need for the day when the treaty does become possible. Yeah.
And the treaty will help make it possible.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I have an eye on the clock. It's almost 9:15. So I wonder if we can take, let's see. Brad Wolf just signed himself right off of there. He had his hand raised. I chased him away. So we have 3 people with hands raised. How about all 3 of you ask your questions, and then you will just take your question, and then Jay and Ralph, you can reply to them all at once, and we'll call it a night after that. So I don't see a name, but the first person is calling from a telephone. If you're there, 1-847-744.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Hi, Jake is my name. I'm calling from Chicago. I'm a member of Chicago Area Peace Action. I'm speaking for myself here. Yeah, I've heard all about the IPPNW. How do you enforce it? What kind of enforcement mechanism is there for it?
Okay, that's the first
You're
question.
saying, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. And then we'll take, okay, so the next person is Bernie Holland. Go ahead, ask your question. Thank you, go ahead.
My name's Bernie Holland. I'm speaking from London, UK. So thank you for your presentation, Ralph. Excellent. I'll be brief. I'm looking at this as steps towards what, you're not going to do this, all right, in one go. This unilateral thing is a no-no. So look at it as a step towards doing this, is to encourage the USA to join BRICS. All right. There was a summit in Moscow with President Xi and Putin. I don't know if you read the documents on it, but they are very keen to have the USA truly as a partner in this with the global majority. All right. And if you could get the USA into this this alliance, where they would have a chance to be aware of the fact that both President Xi and Putin want an end to this. They both want, they do want an end to this menace. And I feel that would be a step towards it. The second question I want to just put very briefly, which is possibly what Brad Wolf might have asked you about, serving a notice on these arms manufacturers, all right? Going into the Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, these people, and serving a notice on them. How realistic that is, I don't know. So those are my questions to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bernie. And Barbara Harrison, go ahead, ask.
My question is, how do we handle countries such as Israel that state that they don't even have nuclear weapons? I mean, we know they do, but they, back and forth. No. And I don't know if there are other countries that take that stance as well. That's it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So Jay and Ralph, you want to go after those questions?
Well, the last one was a really hard one. That wasn't very fair. I do think it's true for all the nuclear weapons states. With the new global arms race, I think we have the risk of going the wrong way on non-proliferation, and some other countries pursuing nuclear ambitions as well, if they see the NPTs broken down. I think part of the answer is the really hard work of building a security environment where countries feel that they can survive without nuclear weapons, without having to resort to them. I remember 20 years ago, I was at the UN for one of the NPT reviews, and I think it was the ambassador from Costa Rica who said, nuclear weapons states think that their nuclear weapons are a sign of their strength and indicate their strength to the world. Those of us who live without nuclear weapons see your weapons as a sign of your weakness. And I think it's helpful for us to remember there are 9 nuclear weapon states, there are 32 nations under the nuclear umbrella, and everybody else is out there surviving without nuclear weapons. Entire continent of South America passed the Treaty of Tlatelolco to make themselves a nuclear-free zone. So we have models of other ways of doing things. It's certainly not going to be easy to persuade people.
And Costa Rica, of course, has no army.
Right.
And the Quakers in 1950 many of them left the United States to do dairy farming up in Monteverde. They moved to Costa Rica.
How about Bernie's questions, Jay and Ralph? One of them was about war corporations, which is what our focus war industry resistors network is. And the other was take one step at a time. So any
Well,
reply?
I mean, certainly we're going to have to take one step at a time, because I don't think there's any shortcuts to get into the elimination. And I would say, I mean, one of the reasons why I was excited about getting to talk with you all is I have said for a long time, at least half, maybe more, of the impetus for the new global nuclear arms race is the money. The military is not demanding new nuclear weapons, untested, unreliable nuclear weapons. But the contractors, the defense contractors, the weaponeers at the labs, at the production places, man, they want that money coming in. And I think it's a huge driver. So if we're able to shut off that tap, if we're able to create a bottleneck or to withdraw the financial support for this, then a whole lot of the reason that nuclear weapons exist in the world goes away, and we're just down to the raw politics of it.
Okay. Anything to add?
Yeah, I don't have expertise in the Pentagon, but I do in the Department of Energy and the nuclear weapons labs. And I'll have to be simplistic in my remarks given time, but we basically have a nuclear weapons stockpile that has been full-scale tested over 1,000 times. And maintenance of that stockpile is pretty well understood with an engineering approach best exemplified by the Sandia labs, although that's no longer true. But there's the relatively simple exchange of what they call limited life components. You go in and you replace tritium. My underlying point is all of this, it's not rocket science. It's rather simple maintenance. Instead, here's the funny thing is President Clinton got screwed when he put up the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty for ratification. He's supposedly such a good politician, but he didn't count votes. He basically got screwed by the nuclear weapons labs. The labs were getting lots of money under the so-called stockpile stewardship program because there was no longer full-scale testing. But the labs essentially took the money and ran, and it's been increasing ever since. And now there's these exorbitantly expensive programs, life extension programs, new designs, et cetera, et cetera. It's to give you the lay of the land within the Department of Energy nuclear weapons complex. There's essentially 47,000 people working in it. Of it, only around 5,000 are actual federal employees. All of the rest are contractor employees. A lot of them you're familiar with: Lockheed Martin, Bechtel, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll just close echoing what Ralph said. Don't underestimate the profit motivation that is stimulating this new arms race. It's a very heavy factor.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. And I think this might be a good time for us to call it quits. Let me remind you all that speaking of those nuclear labs, we do consider them part of the war industry, and we're hopeful that people, and we have 35 different organizations around the country who are attempting to put pressure on one of these war corporations or part of the war industry. And we're hoping that people will look at these labs as well, not just the corporations themselves.
You know, my one friendly amendment is we got the corporations, and then we've always had the major involvement of major universities.
Yeah.
So don't forget about that. And especially the University of California.
Yeah, we've had probably 2 webinars on the connections to the universities, and we've got another one our very next one coming up is about research. Michael Clare is going to talk about what's happening in weapons research in universities. So it may or may not cover nuclear weapons. It probably will, but yeah, you're absolutely right. We consider them part of the military-industrial complex too. So before we get away, Paul, you said you had a couple of announcements. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Ken. Well, the first is that WIRN is going to be planning a National Day of Action in which we're trying to get as many of the groups in our network to participate. That planning is going forward now, so we'd ask people to keep an eye out, but we're hoping to have some type of National Day of Action focused on these companies making nuclear weapons sometime in April. And then the other thing I'll mention is that many of us, because of weapons sales to Saudi Arabia, have been focused on the issue of Yemen. The situation in Yemen is at a critical point right now, and we'll have an international Yemen online rally this Saturday at noon Eastern time. And I just put the link to that. If you're concerned about Yemen, have you been working on this issue? Don't give up on it yet. There's lots of work to do. And please participate in this online rally this coming Saturday. I just put the link where you can register for that online rally. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Jay. Thank you all for coming. And yeah, let's keep after it, everyone. We have another webinar coming up April 5th. And let's stick together and keep working at it. So
Thanks,
have a good
everyone.
evening, everyone.